Well, I had a lot of interruptions this time, and a trip today that I didn't expect I was going to take, so I don't know how this is going to come up because I'm somewhat unprepared. But that's all right. It isn't much about Shakespeare tonight anyway. Because after I thought about, I looked in retrospect at last time's talk, and I became very much aware of the fact that several important points in what was said was not made clear at all, and it didn't look like there was going to be another opportunity that was going to present itself to clarify it. So we'll start out with a few hours of clarification, and then we'll end up with some Shakespeare. Most of the matters that were unclear or that we have never really elucidated have to do with symbolism and with specialization. Now, each one of us in our essential spiritual being is a whole. Each one of us is made in the likeness of God. That is, we are each a microcosm. Just as the universal spirit has its spiritual nature, we as individual spirits have the same kind of makeup. However, we're focused very much, are we going all right here? Yeah. We're focused very much in a dense realm with a lot of hard limitations to it. And our expression of our spiritual being is very limited. We say to ourselves, I know what I wanted to do, or I know what I wanted to say, but we can't ever do it because we have limits to carry it out. Even our best creative ventures that we work at to perfect, they never come out the way we want them to because of the limitations of the matter that we're working in. Part of this is also because as self-conscious creators, we're very young and we're very inexperienced. And because we're not experienced as creators, that adds even more limitation. Now, when the limitation is due to materialism, one of the ways that we cope with limitation in materialism is by specialization. We are not all Leonardo da Vinci's that can do everything and excel in everything, so we tend to specialize. When we specialize, maybe some things we can get right, or we can do some things to perfection. One of the most severe limitations in materialism as we experience it is the loss of the Garden of Eden. That is, we lost the inner vision that was ours in what is symbolically referred to in the Bible as the Garden of Eden. We could perceive with an inner eye the more subtle forms of the psychic realms, and we could understand or almost visually see spiritual meaning. When we are thus blinded to half of our constitution, when the spiritual part of our being is cut off, then form and meaning become separated from each other. And when we have experiences, those experiences aren't total. And so, material forms are not always rife with meaning, or the meaning isn't completely live in them. And so forms then take on a symbolic character. a form stands for meaning. It stands for it because we can't experience it immediately because of our material limitation. And so things become symbols, and they lose part of their life because they are symbolic. So any symbol is always a little bit dead. A complete living experience where form and meaning and everything is unified is alive. You know how it is when you have those kinds of experiences. You're wide awake like you've never been before, and there is no death there. So symbols, being a little bit dead and standing for meanings that we can't always experience in a living moment, form something like a reflective gateway between the world of form and the world of meaning. It's limited, but since we're limited, it's not so bad. We even tend to look at each other symbolically. Very often, we look at others as symbols of something. Somebody as a symbol of security, or somebody as a symbol of intelligence, and probably the worst is a tendency that is more likely when we're incarnated into males' bodies, and that is to look at women as sex symbols, or to look at body parts symbolically rather than for what they are. When we do this, it's often difficult to tell the difference whether the symbolism is in the perceiver or whether it is in the object. Whether the object is a symbol or whether the symbolic way of looking at that person is due to the limitation of the perceiver. Probably it's a little bit of both, but sometimes one is more than the other. Now we all see animals, and we can take animals for what they are, as sentient beings, and we can love and appreciate them, but in their limitation, because every animal is a limitation, it's not a complete microcosm like every human being is. Yes, it lives and it has emotions and it has the effects of thought, but it isn't a self-conscious whole. Each animal is a specialist, and in that specialization, it becomes a symbol. So we find in Native Americans and Tibetan Buddhists and other primitive peoples, we find that I'm just tweaking him a little bit. We find that animals take on a symbolic character to them. And it seems the more limited the form, the more symbolic it becomes. So that if we take something like a circle, that circle is extremely limited, and we see it almost extremely in a symbolic sense. In fact, in our limitations in the material world, we tend to try to reduce everything to mathematical symbols, geometric or other mathematical symbols, and in that way, in that simple way, we hope to understand the basic meaning behind something that is hidden or esoteric or occult otherwise. We do try to symbolize human beings, but we can't do it completely because human beings aren't always predictable. They do have the live, self-conscious spirit inside, and they do things that are unexpected, things that are surprising, and it's very hard then to completely symbolize a human being. Now, when we're looking at a play like The Tempest, no matter how well it is done, it is much more severely limited than life. And it is much more specialized than life. Therefore, the play and the elements in a play are much more likely to be symbolic than life is. So there is concentration, and there is limitation and symbolism, all of which are in the hands and in the art of the playwright, and even to some extent the actors. So when somebody creates a play, they're not creating a slice of life, because you just can't do it as a slice of life. It wouldn't make any sense if it did, Andy Warhol notwithstanding. So in some senses, a play is something like a mathematical symbol. And parts of the play are symbolic. And characters in a play, because you can't show the whole of a character, are specialized abbreviations, and they become symbols. We noted that in some cases along the way. We noted that Lady Macbeth, for example, was stereotyped, and she looked very much like a Capricorn woman. And that was a shorthand that described that cold kind of character. And who else would say something like that? You have too much of the milk of human kindness. Exactly, I don't remember the statement how it went. Other characters symbolically represent stations in life, like the sycophantic bureaucrat is shown in Polonius, who had almost no real living character of his own at all. He was so symbolized that he wasn't alive. He was wooden. If the characters in a play become too symbolistic, they become stiff and they become dead, and it isn't really even a play anymore. It's either a melodrama or some kind of rude allegory or something like that, and it really isn't a live play. It doesn't have the play of play in it. It isn't alive. So the artistic ideal, even though it's impossible, as all ideals are impossible, is to create characters as true to life as is possible. To show as many of the dimensions of character in an abbreviated form as possible. But that always has to be compromised, that always has to be balanced with the accentuation of the epitomization of a specific idea. Perhaps the best example we had of that so far, where it showed many facets of one type of character, was Autolycus in The Winter's Tale, because he goes through the whole laundry list of mercurial things. He's a perfect Mercury. He was the son of Hermes, and he was the son that inherited all the bad traits from Mercury. He was cunning and deceptive, but the way Shakespeare shows him, he opens up showing him to be a thief. And then he lies and he bullshits and he misrepresents. He shows good salesmanship but shoddy materials. And eventually he gets all the way to treachery and treason, lying in matters of state. So it showed all the different sides of a mercurial character and the conscienceless clarity and neutrality that Mercury often has. If that was an example of a complex character that showed many, many different sides or different meanings of a truth. Now, in the last talk, we said that was only one way that symbolism can be used in a play. We said there were other options. And one of those other options is if you have a really complex thing that you're trying to portray, that you have several people represent different facets of the one thing you're trying to get at. Now that's a much more difficult thing to do, because each of those characters has to be a living character, has to be believable, has to have a nature of its own, while still representing one facet of something that another character represents another facet of. When we get to the fact that in this play, Shakespeare is doing that very thing, but he is also doing something else. He represents one character to represent more than one thing, so that Prospero participates in a number of complex symbols that are shared with other characters in a play. And that is very, very difficult to do, because there's always a great likelihood to confusion. However, we're dealing with, this is probably the last Shakespeare play that Shakespeare ever wrote, so we're dealing with somebody that is a ripe artist and was profound to begin with, and so that he had developed all of these abilities so that he could pull something like this off. If we look at this play, it's a very simple play. It's a play that is about tolerance and freedom and forgiveness and getting on with life after that takes place. It's really simple. None of the characters is set within a symbolic limitation so that that character can be seen only one way. So you might say that this play is a liberating play for Shakespeare, because Shakespeare is freeing himself from all of the limitations or stretching the limitations of materialism, especially as they are found in drama. He's freeing himself from that by having the whole play be very flexible, very rubbery, almost fluidic, that it comes that way. For those of us that are left behind in materialism, this kind of freedom as a creator produces all kinds of difficulties. And one of those difficulties is ambiguity. Is it this or is it not this? Is it this or is it that? That's, if we're locked in materialism, we're often insecure. We want one thing to mean one thing, and it's hard for us to believe that there is in abstract and in generality that there can be as much accuracy as there is in concrete. You know, people want, well, this should mean only this, and that an idea can have many sides to it and many facets and an interdimensionality and still be accurate. That's discomforting for a lot of people. That's very hard for them to take. A lot of people distrust abstract mathematics. But if you look at it, the abstraction in mathematics has a far greater accuracy than any kind of measurement that we can make in the material world. All our measurements in the material world are estimations. Some of those estimations are very excellent estimations, but they're still just estimations. Whereas what is done in mathematics is highly, highly accurate. And that's the same way with a lot of other ideas, including ideas about spiritual and mythological things. This is so much the case that most of what is said in these talks, which are more about mysticism than they are about Shakespeare, most of the things that we are inferring or paralleling from Shakespeare would be seen as delusional by a lot of people, and maybe even a good number of people in this room. It's all right with me if you want to consider the spiritual ideas that we are inferring or paralleling from Shakespeare as delusional. That's fine. You can always take talks like this and look at them for their recreational value or as something that opens different ideas or gives you a different way to think about things. They don't necessarily have to be bona fide by Shakespeare. Now, one of the ways that we're looking at this play is as a symbolic representation of the evolution of humanity. The evolution of humanity from a very early stage on Earth called the Lemurian epoch. And it carries all the way through to the next stage of evolution beyond our current status after we have graduated from materialism. Last time we mentioned that the Lemurian epoch was when we declared our spiritual sovereignty. We did so by taking control of the divine creative power. But we were peremptory about it. That is, we utilized the creative energy, both sexually and in magic, before we knew how to do it in harmony with the intent of the cosmos. And in so doing, we introduced all sorts of discord into the cosmos, and what is called the fall of humanity is a consequence of that. I don't want to go into the whole bunch of that again, but just a few things to say about it. So we abused our privilege as creative, self-conscious human beings by doing so in ignorance. We were ignorantly applied to sexuality, and we were ignorantly applied to magic. Terribly so. Now, we mentioned that at the time of what is called the fall in Lemuria, that the divine hierarchies that guided us and guided us very carefully, they controlled us willy-nilly, just like all of the animals are pretty much controlled willy-nilly. They had to withdraw because we're said we're divine and you can no longer mess with us. And if one is dedicated to the Spirit within, if one recognizes with awe and humility the divinity, the godness within, if another person says, I am now choosing to express that divinity from myself, you have to take a hands-off policy. You know, it isn't any written law. It's just that you have so much awe and so much respect for the divinity within yourself that you have to have it for every other being that is spiritually self-conscious. So the hierarchies could no longer lead us around, especially the angels who used to, from their status or their location on the sun, they used to guide us in procreation. We still have that symbolized to this day in the term honeymoon, in that there were certain phases and positions of the moon where the guidance came to us to procreate because they were harmonious. They were sweet times to do things to work in harmony with the cosmos. So what the hierarchies did, they didn't want to leave us helpless because the Spirit couldn't completely enter in yet. It was pretty much withdrawn because it was ignorant of the ways of the personality. So we had to have something to take care of us, and the gods could no longer do it. The hierarchies had to lay hands off. So what they did is in our personality, that is, in our lower mind, and especially in our desire nature, They produced a pseudo-self that was a reflection of the divine self, but within the instinctual stuff of our psyche, and it was to take care of us until the divine spirit became strong through experience and became wiser to the ways of the world, and we could enter in what some Christians would call a continuous experience of the Holy Spirit, and we would then take over. Instead, this pseudo-self took over and usurped or arrogated to itself the control of the whole personality. So much so that we even think that our ego nature, which is that lower pseudo-self, we think that is the real us. And we said that in that lower nature was represented by Antonio, whereas the withdrawn spiritual self that was given to spiritual contemplation was symbolized by Prospero. A second thing that we suggested is that the cast of this play represent the different stages of evolution and history of humanity. That Caliban represented the ancient Lemurian form of existence. The other drunkards, who we haven't encountered yet, represented the people of the Atlantean epoch. The aristocrats, with all of their intrigue and constant trying to gain advantage of each other, represent the humanity of our time. Ferdinand and Miranda represent humanity on the verge or on the edge of higher consciousness, and Prospero, in this sense, represents the enlightened humanity of the future, fully conversant with the spiritual worlds, a full seership and full command of all of the creative properties. So this is a history of humanity laid out in the cast. It's a very pretty way of doing things. And but there were some things that were not clear about the way we mentioned it last time. There were a lot of things that were left out. Especially what was left out was the relationship of life and form, and what results in the relationship between life and form. Now we're going extremely slowly. We haven't read a line yet tonight. Next time we're going to go much faster because we'll have laid the groundwork. We're going very slowly in this rendition. And that is very excellent for seeking spiritual meaning. Because when you go very slowly, it's like looking at a symbol. It's like looking at a piece of art or a statue. You can look at it from a whole bunch of points of view. If you take your time and look at it and contemplate it in stopped action, you can derive a huge amount of meaning out of it. That's terribly ironic, though, because everything in stop action then has to be viewed symbolically. And that's just what we're doing, is we're looking at the play in a very much symbolic way, when it would be much nicer if we could just set the whole play aside and start interacting with each other with full spiritual consciousness, almost like prophesying for each other wisdom or something like that. So we can't do that. This is very nice for getting at meaning, and meaning is what this is all about. These are talks about mystical philosophy, and mystical philosophy puts us in touch with the realms that are far less formal, but are just dense with meaning. And so that's what we're trying to do. But on the other hand, the bird is on the wing, and we live life on the fly. Often we have to sit back late at night and reflect at what happened during the day, because we have to be keeping up with it all the time when we're when we're doing things. You know, our lives aren't meaningful until we think back. Oh, that's what really happened. I didn't have time to think about it then. Okay, and it is this interplay of life on the fly versus life stopped and contemplated is what we want to get at. When we do this, we have to be exceedingly careful, because there are a lot of misconceptions that can be drawn from what we have said, and they can lead to horrible prejudices. So I wanted to take a little bit of special time to look at some of the things implicit in what we're saying about characterization and stages of human development, and so that we can do that without prejudicial opinionation. When we say something like Caliban represents the humanity of the Lemurian epoch of time, that's something that can be very grossly misunderstood. It leaves a likelihood to scurrilous racism, which is not what we want to do. People begin to put forth notions like primitive and backward people, and everybody has their pet group that they think is primitive and backward that they would name Caliban. For example, the Muslims think that Christians are backwards because Christians have had 1,400 years now to espouse Islam, and they haven't done so. So they're backwards. Now, yes, it is true that human forms and some, but not all dimensions of human consciousness were primitive in the Lemurian epoch. But some aspects of human consciousness in the Lemurian epoch were much closer to divine than we are. After all, the Lemurian humanity was doing magical and creative work. We mentioned last time that in the book of Genesis, which, by the way, both Muslims and Christians like, Adam and Eve were naming the animals. That is, they had the word of power. And everything that we see now in the, taxonomical table of evolution was a product of their speech. We threw off animal-like qualities, and we threw them off by speaking them into forms that the life wave that we call the animals inhabited and gained experience through, I should say. Now, I don't think there's anybody in this room, even though we consider ourselves to some degree evolutionarily advanced beyond Lemuria, there's no one in this room that can produce those kinds of forms like that or have that magical kind of ability. Another misconception that we have to clear up is the misconception of form. The primitive forms of the Lemurians are not anything like modern humans. And they're not anything like what we consider to be primitive forms. The conditions on the earth, even the density of matter itself, were not like what they are now. So the bodies had to be different to relate to those different conditions. Now, even if we try to designate that some human forms are backward or primitive in our present time, even though they were much removed from Lemurian times, even now we encounter enormous difficulties. By what standard do we judge backwardness, or progressiveness. That's an exceedingly hard thing to do. Usually what we do is we judge prejudicially by justifying our forte as being superior. Suppose a collection of humanity, you can call it a race if you like. I don't think there are any races left on the world, at least it's not what the geneticists think. There was an interesting issue about 2 years ago in Discover magazine about races, and the claim was there that there really isn't a race left anymore. There isn't anything that hasn't been cross-pollinated. But suppose there is a collective group that we want to call them a race, and suppose they are physically very strong, very capable, and very talented. That group of people might tend to think that mental people were weak and neurotic, and that emotional people were nostalgiacs, and that they were just fluttering about. So the point I want to make very clearly is that unless we can see the archetype of the evolutionary creation to which we belong, that is the divine plan of creation, and the different stages and milestones in it, one cannot really clearly make such a judgment as to what is primitive and what is advanced. I have yet to meet such an individual, except in reading. And usually the people who claim to have such an ability to see that divine archetype are people that do not make those kinds of judgments. You can ask the question, is there any relationship between the forms of the ancient Lemurian epoch and the forms now? The question is an undoubtable yes. But there are things that are much more significant than the sequence then or the sequence now. Oh boy, how to get through some of these things. Suppose we create a simple form of some kind, any kind of form. Suppose it is a human form. We may not have any remnant of the original human forms because everything has changed. Then after a while, another type of form is produced. Superior in some ways, but sacrificing some forms in other ways. Suppose the sequence continues, so that you have a first form, a second form, a third form, and such, till you have a number of forms. It does not say anything about the quality of an individual because an individual is incarnated in one of those forms. Some individuals prefer to work with the first form. Not necessarily because they're stuck in it, but because they like the original intent. In music, very often, composers take a piece of music, compose it, and then they compose another version of it, they compose another version of it, and often there may be improvements, and there certainly are elaborations in the following presentations, but none of them has that pure spirit as the original intent. It may strike you as funny, but I still use encyclopedias from a century ago. I don't use them for technical things, for about electronics or anything like that, but for some things in the liberal arts, they're superior to modern encyclopedias. And it's a similar, you can make the same case for types of bodies. Moreover, suppose this is the first edition, second edition, third edition, and all of them have been around for a long time, evolving, and the whole milieu, the whole environment through which they're evolving has also been around for a long time, and it is changing. So they might still have the same relationship to each other of first, second, and third, depending on which way you're looking at it. If you're looking at primality, this is the first. If you're looking at it in terms of a vanguard sense, this is the first. But the modern first, second, and third that has come down from each of them may not be anything like the original, and all very superior. Let's take an A, a B, and a C, musically. A, B, C. Originally, each had a quality, each had an idea, but evolved through a long period of time. Even if A was extremely primitive, evolved over a long period of time, A is way advanced over the original C, because everything is over here now. You see what I'm trying to say? I'm trying to say that the differences between all the forms, we're talking only about the forms now, that humanity expresses through is very close, because all have gone through an extremely long period of evolution. It is sometimes easy to get mistaken ideas about this as a matter of perspective. If you try to climb Mount Everest, it seems really, really high. And if you go to the Mariana Deep, it seems way down, like your entire body would be crushed by being underneath. But if you take the whole world relative to itself, we cannot make a ball bearing that is as smooth as the surface of the earth. Mount Everest or the Mariana Deep notwithstanding, because the deviation that they have relative to the entire surface is extremely, and this is circa 1960 something. I don't know, since 1960 the mechanical engineers or the material scientists may have been able to make a ball bearing, but circa 1960 we were not able to make a ball bearing as smooth as the surface of the earth. And so what seems like a difference, the guy you don't like might seem like the Mariana Deep and your Mount Everest, but really, in the relation of the whole of things, there really isn't much different. And we tend to make way too much out of it. And even if you take the formation of A, B, and C, there may be, the vanguard, like these cars may be going across the country. But it's the trip across the country that counts, and it's not the ABC. In fact, if we look at it, suppose this is the modern status of A, B, and C. Somebody may be in Form A, but if they're at the vanguard of Form A, they're advanced over all of these people who think that they're advanced in Form B. And to some extent, they might even be overlapping Form C. So you can't make, what I'm trying to say is from our vantage point of looking in the dark, you cannot, on the basis of rude judgments about form, can you make any judgments. You have to have the spiritual vision. You have to have the spiritual vision with enough capacity to see the whole of things, to understand it all. But even then, things are not determinate. They're not determinate because we haven't talked about the life that inhabits the form. Some beings may be able to evolve more quickly at some stages of evolution and not at others, just because of their very spiritual nature. It's like the Tour de France. Some people do really well on the straightaways, and then other people make it by being great mountain people. And some of the individuals that we think are lagging now may at some time in the future supersede, because the conditions will be such that their nature of the spirit is such that it is more in tune with those evolutionary conditions. And despite all of these things, nothing takes into account initiative. It's up to any individual in any evolutionary step to, oh my goodness, we're that far. No, we're doing all right. We're doing quite all right in time. We're not going to be here over 90 minutes, I don't think. Any individual can catch fire at any moment. And any individual, by applying self to the conditions, no matter how hard those conditions are as a consequence of past inactions or misactions, any individual can succeed and do so in superlative terms. And so, all right. Now, I think we've cleared most of those issues, but I just, there are issues. I don't want to be a liberal in the sense that liberals refuse to talk about certain issues because they're not politically correct. And if you take up those issues, you're automatically branded as not right. But on the other hand, I don't want to talk about issues that in such a way that it sounds like barroom racism or something like that, because it's a difficult place to be in. So the idea is that we don't have any of the original forms. Not even of the latest editions, we don't have any of the original forms. Everything has changed. The sequence of the appearance of those forms may be the same, but the way those forms are may not bear any relationship to the originals. And the form reflects the life, but it requires some degree of spiritual vision or a lot of intuition to be able to determine the evolutionary status of the life that has precipitated that form. Life exists independent of form, and different qualities of life may exceed or excel in different conditions of form. All right, and above all, this is irrelevant to the factor of initiative, and that's all important. Unfortunately, in the material condition that we're in and under the sway of egoism as we are, competition plays all too great a part. And we're often pushing each other down or pushing each other back to succeed as though this were something like an automobile race or something like that. All right, now we're finally coming to the last point that we didn't clarify last time. To review what we said then and just a few minutes ago, sometimes a character represents a specialization of one thing and as many facets as possible, as in Autolycus. Sometimes several characters represent different facets of the same thing, such as Prospero representing on one hand the higher self, and in another case, humanity of the future. And third, sometimes several characters represent different stages in the evolutionary development of one thing. The last two things are in effect saying the same thing in different ways. A character or a characteristic or an organ of consciousness or an organism and its history are one and the same thing. We, at any given moment, especially right now, are the sum total of our evolutionary experience. It's all boiled down to right now. We don't carry all of that experience with us as conscious memory. We certainly don't carry all the form with us. It would be terribly unwieldy. We don't even carry all of this form. Every atom in our body has changed several times during life, and if we were to hold on to all of the atoms, we would be rather ungainly. We would be huge. But we carry the essence of our evolutionary experience. We are our history. Everything that we are, everything that we lack, every flavor that we express ourselves with is a consequence of our history. Of course, this could lead to prejudices also. Sometimes there are local deviations in time, such like you can't say that if you have a mongoloid child before you that is a evolutionary washout. That's just somebody who's learning a severe lesson for a little while. But basically, overall humanity, we are the result of our history. Now, sometimes the analogy to our evolutionary progress is given as the different grades in elementary and high school. We talk about them being like the successive rebirths or like the successive stages of human development that we've been talking about. It's a pretty good analogy for some things, because from one lifetime to the next, we pick up where we left off the lifetime before. And we make progress from where we were before. In the time in between, we have collected ourselves and we've reflected on the meaning of all of this form, and we come back much wiser. There are a few ways, though, that this analogy is not good. There are, indeed, objectives to evolution. It's not a blind evolution. And there are certain awarenesses that we are being brought to. And we do continue to work at these lessons until we get them. There's no skipping them. You have to go through until you get them. However, there are some ways in which this analogy gives a wrong impression. Our evolutionary experience is not arbitrary. It's not artificial. It's not an intellectual construct. It is a living, ongoing reality. Like school, we can get more out of it if we put more into it. This living experience is such that we have to live it through, though. In school, anybody who's intellectually capable can skip a few grades. You can't do that with life. You have to live through until you can live something out of your being and live it out in a creative way. We're always updating our experience, and we're always becoming new models of ourselves. We're always becoming new beings. Evolutionary creation is not programmed as much as school is, because both evolution and creation are not cut and dried. In science, it's called dry labbing, and it's the lowest kind of scientist of all who fakes an experiment and thinks he knows the results ahead of time. You have to do the experiment to prove or disprove something. In creativity, and this is a creation, In creativity, we may have some beautiful, beautiful ideas, but we don't know what the outcome is going to be when we start. So evolutionary creation is an application of what we know and what we're dreaming to what we don't know. It's the application of the known to the unknown. And it's for real. It's not, hey, let's just paint a picture today. It's for real. One must create and one must become what is in the unknown. The painter may have an idea and a method of approaching that idea, but much of the rest is unknown. It's almost relative to the unknown. It's almost as if we're laying down a path through empty, infinite space in front of us, and then stepping onto the next stone and picking up the one behind us and using it to be the next stone. It's something of that nature. The essence of the past becomes the stepping stone for the future. Our bodies may be based on the divine plan. Even our physical bodies may be little solar universes and have that same kind of archetypal idea. And in the process of an evolution, we may need a liver to handle chemical situations. And that liver may be based on the archetypal ideas of Virgo. But it isn't an abstract Virgo, it is a living experience. The whole idea of a liver, the whole idea of Virgo, and the whole idea of our evolution of consciousness, our progress, is a living, ongoing process. So any moment that we see is a consolidation of everything that we've done up to now. So though when we look at Caliban through the Prospero as some kind of tableau of humanity, sort of like looking through a family album, even to future generations, it's only an intellectual representation. It's still, we can't identify with Prospero and say we're Prospero because we haven't lived into it yet. It is something that we can, like our primitivity or our advancement depends on how we live. Prospero and Caliban are not concepts. Neither is our liver a concept. It's an ongoing, living, useful development. Prospero had to be Caliban, and he had to be Antonio before he could become Prospero. So we live in a continuum, which is an ongoing cosmological reality. There is some logic behind it. It does have archetypal ideas, but it's only as we experience that we go through it. All right, we left off on Act 1, Scene 1, around line 405. We need a Prospero, a Ferdinand, a Miranda, and an Ariel. I'll be Ariel because it's a one-line thing. All right. All right. Who wants to be Prospero? All right. Chard is going to be Prospero. Well, you were Prospero last time. That's not fair. Somebody else gets to be Prospero. Bob, you can be Prospero. All right. Who wants to be Ferdinand? Yeah. Who wants to be Ferdinand? Larry, do you want to be Ferdinand? We're right after Ariel's song, right after the Ding Dong Bell. You're going to have the first words. It says, the ditty does remember my drowned father. Who wants to be Miranda? Millie, you want to do Morel? Sure. All right, one of you two can. You can hand the book back and forth. I think it's... All right, let's read down to the end of the act.
The deity does remember my drowned father. This is no mortal business, nor no sound that the earth owes. I hear it now above me.
Prosper, you're up. The fringed curtains. Oh. You want to take it then? No book. All right. The fringed curtains of thine eye. Prosper is waking up Miranda.
The fringed curtains of thine eye advance, and say what thou seest yon.
What is it? A spirit? Lord, how it looks above. Believe me, sir, it carries a brave form, but 'tis a spirit.
No, wench, it eats and sleeps and hath such senses as we have, such. This gallant which thou seest was in the wreck, and if he something stained with grief its beauty's canker, thou mightst call him a goodly person. He hath lost his fellows and strayed about to find them.
I might call him a thing divine for nothing natural I ever saw so noble.
It goes on, I see, as my soul prompts it. Spirit, fine spirit, I'll free thee within 2 days for this. Oh, sure, the goddess on whom these airs attend, vouchsafe my prayer may know if you remain upon this island, and that you will some good instruction give how I may bear me here. My prime request, which I do last pronounce, is, oh, you wonder, if you be made or no.
No wonder, sir, but certainly made.
My language, heavens, I am the best of them that speak this speech, were I but where 'tis spoken. How, the best? What would thou, if the king of Naples heard thee? A single thing, as I am now, that wonders to hear thee speak of Naples. He does hear me, and that he does I weep. Myself am Naples, who with mine eyes never since at ebb beheld the king my father racked.
Lack for mercy.
Yes, faith, and all his lords, the Duke of Milan and his brave son being twain. The Duke of Milan and his more brave daughter could control thee. Think how 'twere fit to do it. At the first sight they have changed eyes. Delicate Ariel, I'll set thee free for this. A word, good sir. I fear you have done yourself some wrong. A word.
Why speaks my father so urgently?
So gently.
Oh, gently. This is the third man that ever I saw. The first that e'er I sighed for. Pity moved my father to be inclined my way.
Oh, if a virgin and your affection not gone forth, I'll make you the Queen of Naples. Soft, sir, one word more. We are both in either's powers, but with swift business I must an easy make, lest too light winning make the prize light. One word more, I charge thee that thou attend me. Thou dost here usurp the name thou owest not, and hast put thyself upon this island of the sky to win it from me, the Lord Aunt. No, as I am a man.
There's nothing ill can dwell in such a temple. If the ill spirit has so fair a house, good things will strive to dwell with it.
Oh me, speak not to you for him, he's a traitor. Come, I'll manacle thy neck and feet together. Sea water shalt thou drink, and food shall be the fresh brook stead, the withered roots and husks wherein the acorn cradled. Follow. No, I will will resist such entertainment till my enemy has more power.
Oh, dear Father, make no too rash a trial of him, for he is gentle and not fearful.
What? I say, my foot, my tutor, put thy sword up, traitor. Thou makest a show, but darest not strike. Thy conscience is so possessed with guilt. Come from thy ward, for I can here disarm thee with this stick and make thy weapon drop.
Beseech you, Father.
Hence, hang not on my garments.
Sir, have pity. I'll be his surety.
Silence. One word more shall make me chide thee, if not hate thee. What? An advocate for an impostor? Hush. Thou think'st there is no more such shapes as he, having seen but him and Caliban, foolish wench. To the most of men this is a Caliban, and they to him are angels.
My affections are then most humble. I have no ambition to see a goodlier man.
Come on, obey. Thy nerves are in their infancy again, and have no vigor in them. So they are. My spirits, as in a dream, are all bound up. My father's loss, the weakness which I feel, the wrack of all my friends, nor this man's threats to whom I am subdued, are but light to me. Might I but through my prison once a day behold this maid. All corners else of the earth let liberty make use of, space enough have I in such a prison. It works. Come on, thou hast done well, fine Ariel, follow me. Hark, what thou else shalt do me.
Be of comfort. My father is of a better nature, sir, and he appears by speech. This is unwanted, which now come from him.
Thou shalt be as free as mountain winds, but then exactly do all points of my command.
To the syllable.
Come, follow, speak not for him.
Wow, I just discovered something in there that I never saw before, and it's a perfectly true occult truth. And that is, Shakespeare says in here, through Prospero, that the only reason that the magic is effective on Ferdinand is because he has things in his conscience that aren't cleared up. And as long as he has those things that aren't cleared up, he's going to be subject to magic. Meaning to say that if you were a perfectly loving being, that nobody could harm you. Yeah, he says it right in there. I never saw that. You know, you can read over something time and time again. You saw a few other things in there. Well, let's see. It has to be after he's drawn his sword.
Oh, there it is. 471.
Oh, yes. Put up thy sword, traitor, who makest a show but darest not strike. Thy conscience is so possessed with guilt. Yes, when you're guilty, you can't do a thing. All right. We have a few little things to say about this little passage. Last time we mentioned that, among other things, that this is a play about initiation. Initiation into waking, self-conscious spiritual experience. Initiation into the divine, something to which we are now asleep. In this sense, Ferdinand represents the mostly purified personality ready to receive the Spirit. In this sense, Ferdinand is Antonio redeemed. Miranda represents the Spirit. She's somewhat awakened and ready to enter into union with the personality in full consciousness. So what we're talking about here with initiation is a preparation for what is called the alchemical marriage. And she represents the bride that comes down from heaven if we happen to be living in the male's body at the time when the initiation is consummated. This moment when the personality has been humbled in its egoism and stripped of its pretensions and gets its first glimpse of the Spirit, it realizes, just as Ferdinand does, that it's been in prison. That's a really important moment. It's so important because we can't receive the Spirit unless we're humble. And we can't become humbled. We can't humble ourselves. We can only be humbled by being in awe before something greater than us. So this is an exceedingly important moment. And in all of culture, this moment has been treated magnificently. Like in Wagner's Ring Cycle, Siegfried kills the dragon, and the bird, which represents the intuition, tells him, don't bother with the gold. The real prize is at the top of the mountain. And he runs up to the top of the mountain, and there he finds Brunhilde, the spirit of truth, and he awakens her with a kiss. Just like one tiny moment of realization. And that moment in the opera is like you have thrown an enormous stone in the water and the waves ripple way out into the distance. And it's like that one moment, the awakening of the Spirit is beautiful, beautiful. And what happens then is the two of them sing a great love duet. And that's exactly what it's like. When instead of arguing with yourself or fighting with yourself, when you live in a constant harmony where one person or one part of the being is counterpart to the other, and it's like a harmonic going forward. So like a two-part invention or something like that. This version of Miranda meeting Ferdinand is certainly no less beautiful. It is love at first sight of the very best kind of love at first sight. It's mutuality of love. Often when we become aware of our sin and we become aware of the limitations of our personality and all the egoism that is in it, and we are aware of the divine Spirit, we're apt to look down on our personality. And that's a grave danger which Shakespeare sidesteps. The eye of the Spirit can see through all of those bodies which are materialized reflections of divine conceptions. And the Spirit needs that personality for experience, because the Spirit can only grow by new experience. So it's not surprising that Miranda should look at Ferdinand and think him a divine creature and love him. And what comes from him, the essence of our experience that feeds the Spirit, is just like incense. Now, we don't have to love our personality, because personal self-love is egoism. But we can respect ourselves, and we can give the best of ourselves, and we can realize that we are loved by what is divine in us. A few little things along the way. Prospero mentions that Ariel will be left free in 2 days. All initiations in ancient times were completed in 3 to 3.5 days. So the day that this is taking place on, plus twice more, represents the end. When Prospero is talking to himself, he says he must put Ferdinand to work to win his bride so that he really appreciates her, otherwise he'll take her lightly. I think every one of us have heard that in life, and it usually isn't pleasant. It's usually the rationale for hazing rituals. You won't appreciate belonging to us unless you've had to pay for it. However, initiation into a fraternity or a sorority is literally based on initiation into a mystery school, most especially the Academy of Plato, which was a mystery school. In fact, our PhD, Doctor of Philosophy, goes right back to Plato's Academy. If we take this not as an excuse for hazing someone and not for an excuse of victimizing someone or taking out our nastiness on someone, if we take these trials correctly, what is meant by our trials and taking them seriously is that we get much more out of them. And that's what initiation is. A sinner and a saint can be right next to each other doing the same things in exactly the same way, only one is getting much more out of it because of what is being put into it. And if we are put through these kinds of trials and we realize that each and every little thing in our life is something very precious, something very valuable, we're virtually on the way to initiation right then and there. Previous to any initiation, there are trials. Some people like to call them tests. And to some extent, test is a good word. Because before you can take somebody out of the body, you have to know how they're going to act under certain stressful conditions. Because being out of the body is quite an experience. And if you're not really strong spiritually and especially morally, you're going to get overwhelmed when you're out of your body. Plato says it outright in the Laws. He says that in the Platonic school, we get people drunk. And then we try them with women, or we try them with whether they're going to be braggarts or whatever. And if they pass the test of drunkenness, it's pretty clear that if we take them out of their body, that they're not going to do poorly. So they are tests, but a test is a pass-fail thing, and the spiritual hierophant never wastes an activity on just one thing. So there are trials as much as there are tests. Trials differ from tests in that they not only tell you where somebody is at, but they strengthen that somebody in the process of undergoing the trial. It's not like going to college or to grad school, and it's not like skipping grades. It's like being able to live more intensely, to live more thoroughly, and that's what the trials are for. Initiation itself is like a miniature of evolution. And initiation is something that's not like skipping grades, but it is like being able to live out the divine intent of the evolutionary creation by putting much more effort into it and advancing by getting all of the experience possible and then moving on to what will be future conditions for other people. So all schools of initiation have had trials. At one time when we were coming into the physical world toward the latter stages of Atlantis, we were initiated into the physical world, and there were physical trials. Now we are initiated into the spiritual worlds, into the worlds of thought and emotion, and most of all, our trials are moral trials, to see whether we can live for good. Because when we underwent that fall, we took the option of acting out of intent with the harmony of the Spirit. That is for the good of everyone, and so a moral trial is a necessity. It is a ruse of the play that Ferdinand thinks he is king before he really is king, because he thinks he's seen his father drowned. And that's exactly what we expect in the lower nature. Even though it's pretty well purified in the case of Ferdinand, there still is some illusion there yet, and he has to be clarified from that last illusion before he can consummate the marriage with Miranda. And the fact that he's willing to resort to violence is an indication that that has to be purged from him. So the trials are worthy. Now, Miranda's behavior looks like it's overstated for dramatic effect. And it's one of those overstatements that women dislike. You know, she becomes a doting woman. Oh, take care of him, please. Don't be hard on him. The play wouldn't be believable if we took Prospero, the Hierophant, and he put Ferdinand through all of his paces, through all of the tough love that's involved in that. The play wouldn't be believable, because the trials are really, really hard. Though a bit sickly, this rendition of the Spirit, as indicated by Miranda, is quite true. If we only knew how much the Spirit loves us and how much it cares for us, we would certainly be humble. But the ways of the Spirit are subtle. So for dramatic purpose, Miranda can only show that love that the Spirit has in a doting sort of way. We need this tough love. We need these things to take off the husks that we defend ourselves with, that originate from that original lower nature. The Spirit does love us as much as Miranda, but it is as firm as the Hierophant Prospero. All right, next time we should be able to get through at least the first two scenes. Sorry for having to take all of those sidelines along the way. Did we get it in 90 minutes?
Less than an hour.
Wow.